Welcome to the Primate Talk podcast. Here we have nuanced interactions with interesting folks undertaking unconventional endeavors and see the world through eyes that are not just our own.
Hey everyone. In this episode of Primate Talk, we interact with a talented young individual who is extremely passionate towards the cause of nation building, effective administration, and international affairs. Being a qualified chartered accountant himself and in the process of entering the Indian civil services, Amir Joshi has an incredibly unique take on the status quo of our nation and the journey towards national glory tomorrow. We ponder upon many interesting things, like the beauty of our national heritage and what we could achieve through our collective efforts. Ameya also helps underprivileged children in the rural and urban parts of Maharashtra by mentoring them in their academic and educational pursuits. He also works with an NGO called as Vidyadan Sahayak Mandal, and we really support this noble cause. Moreover, I have known Ameya since childhood, and I really hope this conversation gives you a new perspective on many things. So let's begin. Hello, Ameya. We are live. Yes. So today we have a very esteemed, talented individual with us, Ameya Joshi. He is my childhood friend and a chartered accountant, and soon on his way to become an IAS officer. He's studying for civil services right now, and he's going to appear for some exams. So, Ameya, just to get started with, right? How does one develop such a deep interest in nation building, or say even in the administrative services? Because generally people have a very they are very scared of this whole thing because it's a really important uh, decision to make to prepare for such a difficult exam. And so how does one get started with this, for you at least?
I think there are a few, you've covered a lot of things in this question. So let us address them one by one.
Yeah.
The first thing which you covered was the fear that many people have among them regarding this career or say this line of job. Maybe. In that case, there's a very big myth that the IAS officers, the IPS officers, and all the civil servants are at the mercy of the ministers. So while in India, it is true that a democratic form of government and a parliamentary form of government allows for the elected officials to have a say on matters better than that of the unelected bureaucrats. But at the same time, it is also important to note that the implementation wing of the government, or let's say the implementation organ, which is entirely based of civil servants and the bureaucrats, diplomats, police officers, all that category. So that category is extremely important in implementing all the policies, programs, and schemes of the government. So while I think it is important for all of us to understand that in a democracy like India, in a functioning democracy like India, all the various sections and organs of the government have their own jobs. It's the job of the legislature, the political leaders, the elected leaders to make laws, and it's the job of the executive, the bureaucrats, the judiciary, the diplomats, the police officers to implement the laws, or let's say maintain some sort of streamlining of administration and smooth running of all the day-to-day operations of the country. So it must not be mistaken that the politicians have some greater importance and the bureaucrats have a lesser importance. I think each of them has their own job to do, and each of them do their job pretty well.
Right. Yeah. And for
So,
you,
uh,
yeah, please go ahead.
this was regarding the myth and the fear that many people have. As regards nation building, I think as Indians who are millennials and also who have been born at a time when India is going to have its maximum demographic dividend, it is the onus on all of us to ensure that we contribute in whatever small way we can and in whichever way we can to making India a better place to live for all the people who are maybe less privileged than us, who are maybe who have less access to resources than us. So I think as individuals, as educated individuals, it is the duty of all of us to ensure that we create a better, let's say, a more conducive environment for those people who don't have as much as us.
Right. And for you personally, what was the driving factor? Because I see that a lot of people, they are genuinely interested in this process, right? Quite a few of them, they do it for uh, just the, the respect they get after entering into civil services. For you personally, how was this journey, right? Why did you choose to, embark upon this journey?
So, from a very young age, I was quite interested in the running of government. So, when I say the running, when I talk about the running of government, it has got to do with how the government, I mean, how the day-to-day administration of the government happens. So, what a layman might see on TV or maybe in the news is how important laws are enacted, how parliament meets, how people fight in parliament, and so on. So that is what a normal person or let's say a layman sees. But we also have to understand and appreciate that behind the scenes, behind all this news that we see on social media, on TV, in newspapers, there is an entire machinery which runs day and night to ensure that people have access to resources, access to services. They are entitled to their rights, which are granted to them by the constitution. So I think it is very important for us to appreciate the role that these unknown warriors play on a day to day basis, and also contribute in whatever way we can so as to help streamline the organs of the state better. So yes, that was a driving factor in my let's say civil services journey. But at the same time, it is also important to note that while the IAS, IPS, IFS, and all remaining civil services are a very respectable profession, one must not get into it only for the sake of power or respect. So maybe 50 years back, or let's say 30 years back, even 30 years back, there was let's say a craze of people going to the IS just for getting that Lal Batti ka gadi.
Right.
So we must understand that ultimately everything is for the people, is for the citizens. So let us for those who are trying to get a who are attempting and are trying to get into civil services, I will like to maybe request them or urge them that don't get into it only for the sake of power. The power might be a byproduct of certain postings which you have or certain cadres which you are into, but think of it only as a byproduct and as the as maybe a factor in ensuring that you serve the people better. So let us, for all of the aspiring civil services aspirants, I would just like to request that let us not make such a big fuss of power. It is ultimately the will to make a difference that counts, or the will to make something more. I mean, the will to consider that and appreciate that there is something more bigger than yourself. There is something more bigger than our tiny little lives and all the tribulations and trials associated with the thrill of being associated with something more greater than yourself and something for the greater good is what should propel every civil servant and civil service aspirant also.
Right. I really like the way you put it, because you spoke about unsung heroes, right? There are a lot of
Hmm.
people who are working behind the, you know, it's a kind of a lackluster job, if you will, because people do not know your names directly, apart from a few, right? Very few people who get interviewed on, say, televisions, or they get invited to shows probably, and then people get to know, okay, so this is so and so person, right? I think there is this IPS officer which is who is very famous, and probably you can let me know some people who should be more popular because of their work, right? Because very few people get that attention which they are really, which is really required, for instance. And also about the point that, there should be a genuine interest behind this concept of, nation building, or even say, to understand a particular, even about their own cadre, right? What does that exactly do? Because keeping your vision as wide as possible and then not focusing on very small aspect, because there is a certain big picture behind everything which goes on. So yeah, that really makes sense to me. And so any people who you think who are in this, right, who are in the administration, and whom you think that people should know more about, right? Few individuals, probably some
So,
people who you look up to or so.
so yes, as regards the different civil services, I'll mention a few of them. Let's say in each civil service. So for IS, I think the work of a district collector. I mean, if you're following somebody on social media, it's well and good. But I think every citizen or every layman should be acquainted with the work of the district collector of the district where he resides or which is his place of work. So every district collector, see, in India, where we follow PM, CM, and DM structure, the DM, or say the district magistrate, or what we call as the district collector. So that particular person is at the helm of affairs of a district. So while his work is not often appreciated as regards the MPs and the MLAs, he often plays a very important role in implementing what directives come to him and also what suggestions come to him from the elected officials. So, with, I mean, whichever district you live in, you should make it a point to at least know something about maybe your district collector, what work he does, and what all aspects he's involved in. So, as students, we cannot imagine the level and the kind of pressure which these officials face. So when let's say when you're in charge of the entire affairs of a particular district, you have to be on your toes day and night. It's basically a thankless job. So it's you can get a call at 2 in the night. You have to rush to. You have to. I mean, there's a range of responsibilities, right from handling law and order situations to receiving a VVIP to become the troubleshooting manager of the government in that particular district. So there is a wide range of responsibilities with IS, and that is why, as you know, it is called the premier civil services of India. So, so I think yes, as regard the IS, it is very important for all of us to understand and appreciate the role of the district collector and also to learn whatever we can from it. As regards diplomats, which form the Indian Foreign Service, I think you can follow certain diplomats on social media who are on social media quite actively. So let's say Mr. Rahul Srivastav, who is our India's ambassador to Romania, is quite active on Quora, Twitter, and he has also written a few books on various different issues. So he often on Quora he often directly answers questions regarding to diplomacy, regarding to Indian civil services, regarding what the life of a diplomat is, what the life of a civil servant is. So he is very accessible. It's not that he's no active civil servant on social media will make you feel that they are seated on some high throne and they are not accessible. They are very, very accessible. You can, many people drop their messages directly and they make it a point to respond whenever they can. So I think this one person is somebody who I've been following for a long time. I think he and I share common likings because he wanted to get into civil services only for the sake of diplomacy. He was not interested in any other service. So, and in the second attempt, he did manage to get into that. So he in a way you can call that he is my role model, or let's say somebody who I look up to, because the track which he followed in his life, say 20 or 30 years back, is the same which I have been following now, and our likings are similar. So I do read his blogs or read his answers on Quora, read his updates on Twitter. So just as to get a sense of what is it, what is it to become a diplomat, or let's say what is it to work to become a representative of Indians in some other country. So I think he provides a very clear and very lucid view on that.
Yes, I love that guy. So on Quora, I remember that, Rahul Srivastav, right?
Hmm.
Yes, wonderful guy, because he used to give so many anecdotes about his visits to different countries, how the culture there differs. Like, for example, Russia, I think so. And he has been to Russia, right? Yes. Yeah, really
Yeah.
interesting fellow. And uh, I wonder how these people manage their schedules, right? Because I would imagine that any person at such a high post probably has a bunch of things to do, but yet they find out time to, reach out to common folks, normal public, and then try to answer their queries, however silly they might sound. Because not all of the questions which he answered on Quora are purely related to the administrative services. It is more like they want to know more about him as a person, right? So yeah, that's really interesting. What about Mr. Jaishankar?
So, Mr. Jaishankar is like the, let's say, a father figure or a role model for all of the diplomats who are aspiring for greater things in life. So, just to give a brief idea about Dr. Jaishankar, he cleared the civil services exam at the age of 22, which is a very big thing, and he got into the Indian Foreign Service and has served in multiple postings, right from learning Russian in Russia to being an ambassador in the Czech Republic, a High Commissioner to Singapore, ambassador in Washington, ambassador in Beijing, and also later Foreign Secretary for 2 years. After which he was appointed as the External Affairs Minister by Prime Minister Narendra Modi. So, he is the kind of person who has got a wide-ranging expertise in almost all aspects of diplomacy. So, primarily because of his rich experience, and also because of his interactions with many different people, different people engaged in different sectors all over the world. And I think that the experience, those interactions, those networks, those connections have made him a kind of a knowledge guru for diplomacy, or let's say for Indian diplomats, or for the Indian administrative system and the Indian foreign affairs division in general. So yes, and his being selected as the minister was indeed a very big surprise for almost all Indians, I think, because nobody knew about it. But considering the vast expertise that he brings the thing to the table, he is more than I will definitely say that he is the best candidate that can ever be there for the job. He
Right.
knows the ins and outs of Indian diplomacy. He knows the strategic trajectory which our country wants to take in the years to come, and he is the best. He is best suited to navigate the trials and tribulations of which come with being a diplomat, and which come with being a person representing your country to the outside world, the face of India. Let's say.
Definitely. And help me understand this. So, for example, Mr. Jaishankar or any other diplomat, for instance, they have been doing their work with different governments, correct? I mean, it's not that the government would directly influence them because, anyways, they have their normal set of responsibilities. But to what extent does the rapport between a diplomat or a person in the administrative services, civil services, it coincides or it strongly correlates with the government in place? So, say, we had Congress for a lot of time, then we had BJP. How does that influence the performance or the output of these folks, right? The administrative, the civil services folks. Yeah.
So, the short answer to your question is that it helps to have a rapport with the elected officials in power. But the catch behind it is that while it helps to have a rapport, this does not mean that you build a relationship with them for the sake of favors. So the bureaucracy is officially neutral, and it must be so. But at the same time, uh, we must understand that both the elected officials and the bureaucrats are equally responsible for implementing the schemes of the government, the policies and programs which come to them. So it is important to build a rapport, but I mean, there's a very thin line between building a rapport and actively trying to, trying to solicit favors, or let's say trying to not be as independent as you should be as a bureaucrat. So I think Indian bureaucrats are trained to ensure that whichever government comes in power, they have to be politically neutral, and at the same time let's say uh, they have to have a good working relationship with the people in power. So that is why, even though it has been more than 70 years since independence, the wheels of government have continued, irrespective of whichever party comes in power or whichever government comes in power. The wheels of government have continued, and I think in a democracy, it is very important that a certain set of people who are not elected on the basis of votes are put in place so that there is no interregnum between when a government, when a government loses election and when the other government comes into power. So that is very important, and I think that must be nurtured. The political neutrality and political independence of judiciary of the bureaucracy must be nurtured.
Correct. Now, going back perhaps to your own journey, right? Because I'm just thinking that, okay, so you have been very strong academically, as far as I remember, right? So high school, then college, then you went for the whole CA thing, right? Then you're done with CA, then you pick up this new right, the civil services journey. So the way I see it, CA in itself, it's really tough, right? Uh, and on top of that, you are going to take this as well. So what level of mental fortitude or resilience is required for this? Because generally, uh, people find each one of these very difficult, right? So, like, generally we see that people go for some other courses, perhaps arts also. Not to say that it is somehow less difficult than CA, but yeah, definitely the if you see the success rate for that, it is really tough, right? Lot less people graduate with CA as compared, or become CAs as compared to probably arts graduates, right? So in that case, uh, was it difficult for you to take this decision, or you were really hell bent on going about this way, or no?
So, see, I see the glass half full.
Hmm.
I think that CA prepared me for my civil services journey.
Hmm.
So, see, a lot of courses in India are basically what we call a sprint, not a
Hmm.
marathon. So, CA is in itself a marathon because it's a course which takes at least 5 years. So, considering that, the journey to becoming a CA was actually helpful because it helped me endure for a long time. I took a couple of attempts to clear CA also, CA final. So I think it taught me the value of failure and how you get up from failure, how you rise back from failure, how you take failure as a stepping stone to success. So with those things in mind, I think I was definitely more prepared for giving my civil services exam, which is itself a very big investment of time as well as a very big investment of efforts. So at no point of time, I think, and I feel this is primarily because of my year spent in CA during the CA course. So at no point of time during this journey, this civil services journey of the past 2 years, did I feel the need to just quit, or did I feel that I was wasting too much time, and did I feel that it was too difficult? While it is difficult, there is no doubt about it. I I did have some. I did feel at some point of time that perhaps it might take time, but then the journey will be worth the what comes at the end. So I think my CA course did prepare me adequately for this, because to all the people who are watching this and to all who are perhaps thinking of attempting civil services exam, I think we should all remember that this is a very big investment of time and a very big investment of your, let's say, your productive life. So a lot of people, your peers, will be having fancy jobs, will be earning a lot more than you, and you might feel at times that you're just sitting at home doing nothing. But as I said, it's a marathon, not a sprint. So you need to, all of us need to have that endurance in ourselves to just make it right till the end. So, with that in mind, every civil services aspirant must keep that in mind, that the journey is very difficult, but then the end will be equally rewarding, because at the same time you will have some purpose. You will feel that you have accomplished something which was the purpose of your life. So yes, with that in mind, I think CA did prepare me very well for this marathon of a UPSC journey.
Yeah. I can only imagine because yeah, and I think right now there are still. I mean, this is one field in which people are always interested in, right? It is unlike any other field. So, for example, when people talk about IT, like the conventional IT boom which happened, it lasted a few years. Then people were not too much into it. Then there was this big data boom, right? Then right now there is this data science boom which is going on. So the flocks of people, they try to they tend to get attracted towards a particular field for a time, but this has been that evergreen, I think so, for a long time now. Yeah, great.
Yes.
And then right now, right, so you also are a trained classical singer, correct? And do you still continue to do that when you are, when you feel like it, or right now it's not probably that important part of your life, or how do you go about that? Your hobbies are probably singing.
So yes, I was into music, into Hindustani classical music for about 10 years, right from the age of 8 till the age of 18. So I have given a couple of exams also for Hindustani music, but maybe let's say after 12th, I started giving it a little less importance because of many other factors, because of my CA exams, CA studies. Then after CA now, it has been I've been studying for UPSC for the past 2 years. So yes, after the age of 18, I failed to give it as much importance I perhaps should have given, which maybe I'll regret in the future. I mean, maybe I'll feel a tinge bit sad about it in the future. But I think yes, at a point of time in my life when everybody was having some or the other hobby, then yes, music could have been called as my, particularly classical music, could have been called as my favorite hobby, or let's say favorite way to spend time. Yes. So yes, at one point of time I was very active in music, but I'm not so much active nowadays.
Right. That always fascinates me, like the tradition of music in our country, because it has been there for a very long time, right? Probably I would like to say even more so than Western music, right? Because the array of instruments in Western music, and then correct me if I'm wrong here, uh, is it not a bit limited as compared to what we have in, say, Indian classical music or Hindustani or Carnatic for that matter? Because we have the
Yes.
piano and then the organ on the Western side, probably violin. But here there is a whole range of instruments, say from the sarangi, which has been probably, called as, uh, it's probably called as the human voice box, right? Because it has the variety of notes and stuff, so you can do a lot of stuff with it. So what do you think about that?
So yes, Indian music, or let's say Hindustani classical music, Carnatic music, indigenous music, let's say, is something which has been there right from the time of Vedas. So the Samaved has a lot of references to how the particular hymns of the Rigved are to be sung in a particular manner, in a particular tone. So Indian music has evolved right from the Samaved. So then, right from ancient India to medieval India, when we had the Mughals, the Rajputs who patronized music, and to we had a lot of external influences in music from Persian, from Urdu. So right from those medieval times to modern times, music has evolved a lot. I mean, the range of rag, alap, dhrupat, khyal in Indian music is mind-boggling. I mean, if one were to go deeper into it, then I think we would take the entire day, the entire day today. So yes, music is something which I think all of us as Indians should be proud of, because music, dance, arts, handicrafts are all these things which make us proud of being Indians, which make us realize that yes, our culture is something which has shown the way to the world. At one point of time, we were the factory of the world. We used to manufacture for everybody. Our textiles, our spices were renowned right in all the corners of the world.
Right, definitely. And I actually did not realize this for quite some time, right? The sheer extent or the sheer uh, range of, uh, heritage we have. But slowly, when I started, you know, trying to learn more about it purposefully, right? Say, what are even the Vedas, or how did this practice of so when people generally talk about Indian culture, it's like, you have the Gita as one book which probably should be followed. So they try to equate it with other religious practices, for instance, because, like, so obviously Islam has the Quran, or probably, Christians have the Bible, so definitely Hinduism should have a certain book. But seems to me that that is not the case, right? It is a collection of probably practices from all across this subcontinent, which has somehow culminated in this beautiful culture called as Sanatan Dharma, or Hinduism, as people call it. But yeah, and the way it manifests into different forms, it's really amazing, because as you mentioned in Rig Vedas, they have mentioned how certain, technical aspects of classical music are to be understood, or probably, more information about the structure of the whole thing. And obviously even dance has that, right? So for example, like, say, Kathak or Bharatnatyam, for instance, even they are some very deeply, not somehow, very deeply correlated with the music, right? Percussion, for example. So when you talk about tabla, it has a very intricate connection with that art form as well. Somehow everything culminates into this very holistic uh, kind of thing, which is really awesome to experience. I mean, me personally, I have not been that much into Indian classical music, nor do I understand it completely. But when I hear it, it feels awesome. So yeah, so I think even for an untrained ear, it should be really attractive to, even experience that. Yeah. So, going back to right now, I think everyone has this. I did not want to even, reach this, but say, the way COVID is being handled, right? And like, I've heard a lot of opinions from, general acquaintances, folks I talk to, peers. But from a perspective of a person who is going to be a part of the administration, a part of the bureaucracy, an integral part of the whole mechanism, what is it, do you think that we are doing good right now? Like, India handled it well, state governments handled it well, as in contrast to probably what could have been done. So what's your take on that?
So, regarding the current crisis, I completely empathize with all the people who are undergoing a lot of problems regarding availability of beds, availability of oxygen cylinders, availability of ventilators. So, the situation is indeed very grim, but it is important to not just blame the government for it. I mean, blaming the government is a very easy thing, which every one of us does in our sofa discussions, in our drawing room discussions. I think that's a very common thing which happens in almost every house in India. But I think perhaps we need to go a little deeper and understand the root cause behind all this. The root cause is that we have not been giving adequate resources or adequate budgetary allocations to our health sector. See, this is the root cause of everything. The shortage of beds, shortage of oxygen, shortage of ventilators, shortage of tests for COVID-19, everything stems from this. So, when we talk about developed countries such as the US, the UK, European countries, all of them spend and even for that matter, China. So, all of them spend a tad bit more than what India does on its healthcare system. I appreciate that India's population is many times higher than what the population of the countries which are referred to earlier is. But I mean, if we were to allocate a certain more percentage of our budgetary allocations or our budgetary resources, our extra budgetary resources to healthcare sector, it would go a long way in not creating such a kind of a catastrophe again. So, to give you an example, the government has already taken a lot of initiatives in this regard. It is our target to substantially improve our healthcare allocations and create primary health and wellness centers under Ayushman Bharat to create a comprehensive and holistic view of healthcare in the country. So yes, with that in mind, government has already taken a lot of decisions. But as citizens, I feel all of us, in whatever small way we can, small or big way we can, it is important that, especially for us as millennials, to appreciate the need for quality and affordable healthcare in the country and to work in that direction. So, as millennials, I think all of us are very into social service or volunteering, or let's say being a part of of a charitable organization, being a part of something greater than yourself, working for the underprivileged. So, in that, with that in mind, while education is a much focused on factor and a much needed educational intervention is a much needed intervention considering the demographic dividend of this country. Healthcare is also equally important. So when to all those who are watching this program, I think we as youngsters, in at some point of time in our lives, or perhaps right from now on, we should ensure that we contribute in whatever small way we can to creating a holistic and affordable healthcare system. Because we have to appreciate that if the situation in the cities itself is so dire, the situation in the villages must be something which we cannot even imagine. So it is while the government is doing its job, and it will take some time for health infrastructure to come up. It won't happen overnight. It is important for us also to lend our part, do whatever we can, and ensure that India nowhere again are people dying at nowhere. No, I mean no at no time again in the future are people dying at the gates of hospitals. Are people gasping for breath again? And that there's a comprehensive solution to all these healthcare problems which we have in our country. I know it will take time. I know it is difficult, but I think as we say again and again, if we as Indians we come together, then we can accomplish anything.
Yeah, I like the optimistic approach there, because every country has something to improve upon. And then, we as people, we have everyone says that we have this boon of having too many people, or rather, let's not call it too many people, but essential man force, which can be utilized in various sectors. So yeah, makes sense to me. And say you personally, right? Any particular areas you want to focus on, say, not even with respect to COVID, but in general, when you look at the uh, and definitely you must be aware of the news all the time, right? Preparing for what you're preparing for. So any particular areas which you want to personally focus on?
Well, as I said before, healthcare is one
Hmm.
aspect where I would like to personally intervene whenever I can, and with whatever in whatever capacity that I can. But at the same time, we talked about culture and heritage earlier.
Hmm.
So I think every state in India is a melting pot of many cultures, many indigenous practices, many different kinds of monuments, many different kinds of paintings, arts, dances, and so on. So, with that in mind, I think it is very important to make India a very accessible and a very friendly tourist destination for many Westerners. I think a lot of Westerners are very fascinated about India, considering our rich culture, our religious practices. I think if you would have, I mean, many of you may have known that a lot of Hindu, or let's say not even Hindu, let's say indigenous or Indian religious practices are followed by many Westerners in America and Europe. So yoga. I think yoga is the biggest export that we have. I mean, which contributes to our soft power. So apart from just looking at it as a means to enhance our soft power, I think we should. I mean, as civil servant, or let's say as an empowered citizen of this country, I would like to personally intervene in this area and ensure that no Westerner has to think twice before going to India, just because maybe it's not, maybe they feel it's not safe, or maybe India is. There's a very popular misconception still among many Westerners that India is just a land of snake charmers and beggars. So, so I think we need to comprehensively remove that perception and present India as a brand to the outside world.
Yeah,
So that is another area where I would like to put my efforts to.
couldn't have put it better, because I really strongly feel about this, and just because now you mentioned it, it again came back to me, because still that perception of India is a land of snake charmers, right? It's just a land of forests and then tigers roaming around, or whatever, cows on the street. Yes, that is true. We cannot deny that. We still have cows on the street. We still have, there is this crime rate which is still present. But I think the progress done, uh, it is astounding in areas, and probably people might not be aware about, right? That, and then yeah, help us understand probably. uh, so we only know what is being shown to us through media and stuff, right? But say, you personally, do you think that there is a certain aspect of the progress we've made so far which has to be showcased even more? Like, are there any areas which we are doing better as compared to the rest of the world? Because, like, I would like to think so, that US is a superpower, say Russia is a superpower, they are much better than us in all aspects, but that is not the truth, right? So yeah.
It is certainly not the truth. Uh, well, there are many areas where we have done much better than the developed countries. Climate action, I would like to illustrate one of them specifically, and that is climate action. So, I just recently read a couple of days back that as per the Climate Change Performance Index, which is compiled by an NGO based in Western countries itself. So, as per that Climate Change Performance Index, India is on the top, is one of the top 10 countries which are, which are contributing to renewable energy, contributing to reducing their emissions with regards to the Paris Climate Agreement in force. So, perhaps it is not represented, or it is not published as much in the newspapers or in social media as it should be. But India is, and the current government is contributing a lot to renewable energy. So we have come up with state of the art mega solar power projects, hybrid solar power projects in many states across the country. I can take the name of Gujarat, I can take the name of Rewa in Madhya Pradesh, I can take the name of Tamil Nadu for wind energy, I can take the name of Kerala. In Kerala, I've been to Kerala in December 2019. So in Kerala, right outside Cochin International Airport, there is a huge solar power project, which so that entire solar power project is so big that it can sustain the requirements of an international airport all by itself. So I think these are the small stories, these are the unknown stories which we need to publish and which we need to make people know a lot, because it is the tendency of newspapers and social media, or let's say even the news channels, to focus only on the breaking news, or let's say something which gives them more TRP, or which creates a sensational effect among the public. But at the same time, creating a better India through a better environment, through sustainable development, is something that as youngsters we know the importance of, and the importance of which is only going to increase in the future. So that needs to be highlighted, that needs to be shown, and that needs to be those climate resilient and climate friendly actions, climate friendly behavior needs to be encouraged among all the sections of the public, so as to make India a leader in climate change, in climate action. So yes, that is one area where India has done substantially better than many Western countries. So as Indians, we should not just, as educated Indians, I think it is all is the onus is on us. It's all our responsibility to ensure that we are aware of whatever the government is doing, whatever private sectors are doing, whatever civil society, whatever academia is doing, to ensure that India is a much better place to live as compared to, let's say, the past decades, and to create awareness among our community, the people we know, about various government schemes, about various policies and programs of the government which are not highlighted in social media. So to give you an example, there's also this app called Umang. There's a website called mygov.gov.in, which a lot of people don't know about. Maybe in cities they know, but especially in rural areas, there's a lot of distrust, or maybe there's a lot of non-awareness about these issues. So, as Indians, as educated Indians, it is our responsibility to ensure that we make these schemes, or let's say we make this knowledge available to as many people as we can, because the amount of resources which the government has made available in the public domain are stupendous. I mean, we simply cannot believe that the government has made all of this available in the public domain for consumption of the citizen. So, see, the government has done its job by making things available in the domain. Now, it is our responsibility to ensure that we know that it exists. And point number two is that we appreciate what use can be made out of it.
Yeah, and we see that all the time. I mean, people do generally, the way I see it, people do nothing but criticize the current government in power, right? And I don't blame them. The decisions have not been so easy to, digest for a lot of people. But uh, and then, even I can't claim to know the exact stats of how bad or how good we have been doing, perhaps. So say that if you were to contrast the actions of the current government, or the whole BJP led front as compared to the earlier Congress led front, from a very objective point of view, right? uh, would you say that we are doing better in this decade as compared to the previous Congress led decade, or how would you objectively compare it? Because it seems to me it's really difficult right now, and then people have this very uh, uh, you know uh, they try to bucket it into either of good or bad directly, which need not happen. It should be a very nuanced viewpoint which one should try to harbor towards it. So what do you have to probably add to this? What do you say?
So I think from the common man's perspective, the current government is seen as doing something at least. So the
Hmm.
current government is seen as being on its job, being on its toes, actively creating awareness, actively talking to the people, right from the prime minister to chief ministers to local officials. So the in that point of view, I completely agree with the layman's perspective that the current government is much more on its toes, is much more aware of happenings in society, and is much more at a better position to respond to these happenings as compared to maybe something things which prevailed 10 years ago, where I think the common complaint of people at that time was that uh, the government is not doing anything. It is not seen as doing anything. So
Hmm.
while the government is not doing anything, might be an amateurish view of things, because things are always happening behind the scenes where you can't see them probably. But it was not perhaps it was not doing things so as to bring it to the notice of people, or to make people realize that the government is actually working for their benefit. So yes, in that matter, things have improved with the current government. The current government has also taken a lot of initiatives which are not so publicized for financial inclusion, for digital India. So let's say the JAM Trinity, the Janadhan Aadhaar and Mobile Trinity. So this is something which might, for digital Indians like us, it might seem very silly, or perhaps very small of a event to even make a note of. But considering Indian economy and considering the potential that India has, and the potential of the Indian economy to diversify itself, that the JM Trinity, the digital payments awareness and promotion, the export promotion incentives, the incentives given to various sections of the agricultural population, right from tribals to agricultural processing to bringing in state-of-the-art infrastructure in agriculture, making provisions for that. These are some of the lesser known things which are equally important in a country in which a majority of people rely on agriculture. A vast number of people are tribals who do not have access to resources as much as the urban crowd. Uh, and also a lot of people who live in the hinterland, and who perhaps feel that there is no better life other than moving to a city. So while this objective has not been completely accomplished, I think we are going in the right direction, and perhaps in the next 5 to 10 years we should see some concrete improvements on this aspect.
Yes, lot of areas which we folks might not even be aware of, right? That the government has to play a role in this very nuanced, very specific area as well. So correct, definitely agree with that. And one thing which you might have noticed is that during this whole regime of, say, 8 years or so, the whole Modi regime, the BJP government got a lot of flack for bringing in controversial decisions, right? These were like So the way I see it, early on during the Congress regime, we used to have decisions, but which I could not comprehend completely. Right? There were like probably economic reforms or so, which the layman or the hoi polloi of our country, they might not understand. But right now, the decisions, they seem to be very direct. Right? They strike a chord with some people, and then for some people it is completely misogynist, not misogynistic even, but say communalist, for example, right? Creating a divisive kind of force in our society. And that it just started with demonetization, for instance, right? And then one decision after another decision after another decision, and then seems like it could have been a smart strategy for the BJP government to probably not take such quote unquote radical decisions. But how do you see that? Like, uh, I think one very positive decision which they took was with respect to the Kashmir issue, right? That was welcomed by everyone, basically. Like, no one would oppose to it. But I would say that that is probably one or two of the 10 decisions or initiatives taken up by this government. So do they receive unfair criticism, or legitimately there is a threat to the unity in this nation? There is a kind of divisive force which was generated perhaps by this current government. What do you think?
So, yes, to answer this question, first I would like to say that I personally don't believe that any minority in this country is undergoing any form of persecution. So we were a free country even before 2014. We still are a very free country where every Indian is eligible to express his views in a very open manner. Of course, subject to certain restrictions which threaten the law and order of the society. So with that in mind, I don't think anybody, any party, any individual should make such a hue and cry of there being there being an othering of some people, or let's say there being a sidelining of some communities, there being a persecution. Persecution is, I think, a very wrong word and a very politically concocted word to just highlight the false fears of somebody. I mean, I know a lot of minority communities who are living quite happily and who are quite happy with the current state of affairs. So keeping all these political things out of the bracket, I think some decisions of every government do go wrong. Demonetization, I think, was a hastily conducted operation, which did not yield. Which I must stress, the intention was quite genuine and was quite important in this country, where we have a lot of black money, which I mean, you must have looked at the figures. It's like 15 zeros after a certain digit. So I mean, with that in mind, demonetization was necessary, but somewhere things didn't go quite as planned, and we didn't achieve what result we hoped to achieve. So yes, some decisions of the BJP government, of the current NDA leadership, have gone wrong. But I think that is something which we need, as Indians, as educated Indians. I think we need to appreciate that ultimately, it's a government is basically a human enterprise. So there are bound to be human errors, human fallacies. There are bound some things sometimes are bound to go wrong. So I think we should appreciate that and not unduly criticize somebody for it, because
Hmm.
right from independence, right from the past 73 years which have gone by since independence, lot of governments have taken a lot of decisions which have proved controversial to a lot of different sections of society. So I mean, it is just we need to see the greater good out of it. If I think I personally feel that if the decision was taken with a view to adequately improve the conditions of a certain section of the population or perhaps the entire population, then even if the decision didn't go as, I mean, even if the implementation or perhaps the outcome of the project was not as well as expected, I think we should appreciate that the government at least tried to do something which nobody else had done in the past. So to talk about demonetization again, demonetization happened only I think three times till now, And the only time it happened earlier was when the prime ministers were Mrs. Indira Gandhi and PV Narasimha Rao. So these were two very, let's say, strong politicians and leaders and statesmen of the Congress party. And after that, after PV Narasimha Rao, the prime minister who took this decision was the current prime minister, the incumbent. So it is important to know that uh, when there are strong leaders, when there are leaders who want to make a difference in society, who want to actively make India a leading nation, there are bound to be radical decisions. There are bound to be decisions which not all of us will agree with. Not all of us will feel that this is the right thing, the right way to do it, or the right thing, right way to proceed about it. There will be kind of decisions where we don't like what is happening, what the things which are happening around. Maybe with, you can take the example of the current COVID crisis as well. So while constructive criticism of the government is and should always be encouraged, criticism for the sake of criticism or criticism for the sake of creating a scandal or creating a controversy is something which, as educated Indians, we must desist from and which we must actively avoid others to pursue as well.
Yeah, yeah, correct. And the major thing is that people have suddenly started drawing parallels between the current regime and the Trump regime, right? And when we think about it, it's not that difficult to believe, right? I think the US government probably had a major role to play during this whole COVID scenario also. They did not handle it as well, would you say? And Trump calling it China virus or so. I don't know if how much truth there is that the origin of the virus was from this, was it from a Wuhan laboratory, or was it completely, did it happen from the wet markets, right? A lot of controversy surrounding that. And the sudden rise of Trump, even for the even considering the fact that this guy has legitimately gotten elected through the electoral college, right? So what do you have to say about that? Like the way Americans elect their leaders, is it somehow detrimental to the entire world? Because looks like that the president of the US has a very strong capacity to affect everyone.
Ultimately, we have to appreciate that Trump was an elected leader. So while a lot of people around the world did not like him or did not like his policies, so ultimately the majority of Americans did vote for him, and he ended up becoming president. So he took a lot of controversial decisions when he became president. He can be perhaps accused of not handling the COVID crisis in America, as if his radical views on certain topics. All of these are controversial, yes, but at the same time, we need to understand that America actively knew that Trump is such a leader and that he might take some decisions which are not acceptable to a population outside America. So when Trump came into power, he was very clear that he was being elected only for America and only for Americans. He was not being elected for anybody else. So he basically, right from his campaign, he was very clear that America need not be the moral and the moral and need not have the moral authority to lead the world everywhere.
Hmm.
So he was quite clear about this. His perspective was quite clear. He was working only for America and only for Americans. And if we have that background in mind, it might not surprise us as much as it did when he took some radical decisions, not considering the fate of the world in mind. But at the same time, uh, it is also required for an American president to understand that a lot of, and America is the, as of now, it is the leader of the world. So there are many competitors coming up to rival America, but currently, as of 2020 or 2021, America is the unabashed leader of the world. So the American president or the American elected officials have to behave in a manner which suits them as per this conclusion. So yes, Trump did not behave in that manner, but uh, we also cannot just blame Trump, because ultimately the American people wanted him to behave in a manner conducive only for America and not for the entire world.
Hmm.
So that is a sign of the times to come. America is becoming more and more insulated, more and more protected from happenings everywhere else. They are withdrawing from Afghanistan, they are withdrawing from Iraq, where they are limiting their military engagement to everywhere except for their own soil. So that is a sign of, I think all of us must take it as a sign of things to come, that the world needs a leader who is morally capable, as well as who has the legitimacy to show the proper direction to lesser developed countries, to developing countries, to undeveloped states, to properly guide them in their path of development. I think that is where the concept of multipolarity comes into mind. So, so we must not look at the world now in the years to come. We must not look at the world as just a unipolar world with America showing the way to everybody. There are bound to there are bound to be multiple polar centers in the world. China and India might be two of them in Asia. Let's say Russia might be the one in Eurasia. Germany might be the one in Central Europe. Iran might be the one in West Asia. Saudi Arabia might be the one again in West Asia. A few African countries which have shown remarkable levels of development, like South Africa, um, even small countries where Indian help or Indian aid has played a role, they can also emerge as multipolar centers. In South America, we have Brazil, we have Argentina, we also have the most populous island in the world, Indonesia. We have Vietnam, these countries are basically rising giants. So we have to appreciate that there will be a multipolar world in the times to come, and that as one of the leaders of this multipolar world, India needs to cooperate with all to ensure that while there is no hegemony of any one particular nation, we find a common ground to contribute our individual capabilities and specialities, and that common ground can be had to bring succor and bring relief to all those people around the world in war-torn zones, in hunger zones, in disease-ridden states or disease-ridden places. I think all of us can contribute our collective expertise. For example, India can contribute its manpower, India can contribute its logistics, America can contribute its financial power, Australia, Europe can contribute their financial resources, Japan can contribute its technical expertise. So, with that in mind, if we as humans, if we as nation states, if we as leaders of a multipolar world take it upon ourselves to contribute our respective capabilities, then a lot of problems of this current world can be reduced, can be brought to a decently low level, and can be and that can provide relief for a lot of people who don't have the basic dignity of life.
Yeah, and just to think about this, it took this pandemic for people to cooperate to this extent, right? For nations to cooperate, because uh, when it is that the entirety of humanity is under threat, right, under attack, that is a time when we think, okay, I think this is a good time to cooperate, right? Nation leaders, they might feel in the similar way. So, uh, and probably to add that, how do you think that science probably is a great way to bring in powers together, right? Or superpowers together, because historically speaking, right from medieval ages, 15th century, 16th century, then post World War II, you had all these great minds going to America, fleeing from Germany, fleeing from Nazi Europe, and then suddenly US becomes this huge power with so many Nobel laureates, right? So right now, when we look at the density of Nobel laureates, or probably even the level of research going on, US still remains at the forefront. I think Europe comes not so close second, and other areas, and then you can definitely correct me if I'm wrong here, but seems like science is a very good way to bring in all these countries together. Probably CERN, or your Large Hadron Collider, that was a very great example when different people from different backgrounds, probably, right? Someone might be a molecular physicist, or someone might be a nuclear physicist, so on and so forth. They came together. So, what do you feel about people like, say, Elon Musk, or other Jeff Bezos? Even Jeff Bezos has Blue Origin right now. He's also trying to get in that space fight with Elon. So, uh, do you support the rise of these people and people call them capitalistic. Jeff Bezos gets a lot of flack for being the richest person in the world, but is capital not necessary to take such, daring and ambitious endeavors, say, deep space flight, commercial space flight, journey to Mars, right? How important is it to encourage such individuals and not put them down, as some agencies early on did? So, NASA was not really appreciative of individual efforts to develop commercial space flight. So what do you think about that?
So, in the 21st century, where we live now, when we live now, I think it is a must it is imperative for all of us to go beyond the political definitions of a capitalist and a communist. So, we need visionaries today. So it's as simple as that. We need visionary people today. We need people who have the ability to invoke, to inspire people to do something more, to do something better, to tap their untapped potential. We need people like that. You can call them capitalists, you can call them socialists, you can call them communists, you can call them whatever you want. The fact is, we need people who have the guts within them, who have the potential within them to create something better for humanity as a whole. So Elon Musk, you talk about Jeff Bezos, you talk about Bill Gates through his Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. All these people, even a lot of Indians, you talk about Azim Premji, you talk about Mr. Narayan Murthy, Mr. Sudha Murthy, you talk about these visionary people. At one point of time, they have created something. A lot of them might have retired now, but at one point of time, they were responsible for creating something which the world did not knew that it existed. So Microsoft was a revolution, and it still is something which all of us use on a day-to-day basis. So we have to appreciate the visionary power of these people. We have to appreciate the power of these people to create entire ecosystems of similarly thinking minds, similarly tapping a lot of potential, untapped potential among people. So I personally believe that as humans, we have a lot of potential within ourselves to do great things. The definition of great might vary from person to person, but in a colloquial way, I think we have a lot of potential to do great things for ourselves, for our community, for our society, and for the entire world. So we need such people to tap that untapped reserve of potential within people. So the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, to give you an example, helps a lot of developing countries, including India, in creating ecosystems, maybe on the basis of health improvement, maybe on the basis of educational improvement, maybe on the basis of other factors which provide a concrete basis to people's lives to improve. So the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation wouldn't have been possible if Bill Gates hadn't created Microsoft, right? If he hadn't created Microsoft, he was a nobody in the world. He created Microsoft. He made this entire human enterprise of brilliant minds working, innovating, achieving something day in and day out. So it is the effort of, if Bill Gates had sat at home and just done a college degree and just gone to a 9 to 5 job and done something like that, we wouldn't have Microsoft today. We wouldn't have the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which provides billions of dollars to developing countries for improving their standard of living, for improving their health, education outcomes. So we have to understand that while a very narrow-minded view might say that the capitalists are in it only for creating profit for themselves, we also need to appreciate that these are not just profit-making capitalists. These are people who want to make a difference to the world, and that difference can be possible only by having a vision and having a mission and actively taking people along to accomplish that.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. And sometimes, for example, Bernie Sanders, and I think you might be aware that he's very critical of capitalists or people amassing such huge wealth, right? He has that stance for now how many years now, since he stepped into this political world, uh, and I think he's a senator of Vermont, perhaps. So he is openly critical, and on all social medias he never changed his stance that these people have too much power, these people have too much wealth. So uh, is he correct in criticizing these people, or that is probably one aspect of Bernie which I don't completely agree with? He having so much, he has a lot of people following him, definitely. He did not appear as a candidate for the presidency, but or he appeared, but he did not succeed in uh, getting that thing, or even proving to be a very strong candidate to counter Trump. The Democratic National Party did not support him. So do you think that is a valid criticism at times which he makes, that and not just for America but say globally, when you talk about the wealth disparity? Or is it just a function of some people working harder than the other person? Right, we should not complain, rather, that why does this person has this much wealth? And you made it clear earlier, but is there a valid criticism at times, or you think that the way it's going on right now, it all makes sense?
I agree that we live in a very unequal world. See, we have people buying private islands in the Caribbean Sea, and there are people who are dying of cholera in Yemen. So we do live in a very unequal world. There is a lot of inequality, yes, but we need to appreciate that if there were, if see, the very basis of initiative, or let's say human will, is that you get something in return. So while I completely support private initiative. See, the opposite would be a socialistic country where everybody is equal. So
Hmm.
that is something which stifles initiative. That is something which stifles ambition. That is something which stifles private efforts to improve your own state, improve the state of your community, improve the state of your nation. So if we want to remain where we are for the next 50 years, then yes, socialism is the answer. But do we want to do that? No, we can't. We can't. No country in the world today can afford to be completely socialistic. What I advocate is humane capitalism. So while uh, private efforts, and private ambition, individual ambition is a must to get a better world out of the current scenario. At the same time, we must all stand for human capitalism, which advocates that, which recognizes that some people have better resources than others. Some people are better equipped to make it through life than others. Some people are not as equipped as others to make it through life. And it is the responsibility of those who are more equipped to ensure that they create a conducive environment to those who are not as equipped. So yes, inequality does exist. If you go by the Gini coefficient, there's a lot of inequality in India, as there is a lot of inequality in China and all the developing countries as well. So yes, inequality does exist, but the answer is not nationalizing everything, or the answer is not creating equal status for everybody. So that is not the answer. See, we must go for equity rather than equality. So if you can all appreciate the difference,
Mhm.
equity is something which wherein all the citizens of India, or let's say all the citizens of the world, are properly equipped to make it through life in a decent manner. They have access to education, they have access to reasonably decent healthcare, they have access to the facilities that come with the internet, they have access to the resources, access to sanitation, to water, to nutritious food. I think these are basic things which, as humans, and as whatever political affiliation we belong to, as humans, it is our duty to ensure that we create an equitable atmosphere for sustainable development of all sections of the society, including those who are, especially including those who are not in a position to fend for themselves as adequately as the others are.
It seems to me that you've put in a very beautiful concept here, that socialism looks good on paper, but like yet there has to be a successful socialist state. And though basically the people who support socialistic policies, they have a very good heart, right? Their hearts are in the right places, in the sense that they want everyone to have uh an equal level of life, or probably equal standard of living. But probably we should be socialistic in the provision of equality in opportunities, right? We should be socialistic in providing opportunities, but the socialist aspect of equal outcomes might not be suitable, because people are in general very different from each other. They have different tendencies to work harder, not work harder. And definitely given equal resources to 10 people, 10 people are going to end up in 10 different places. So probably complaining at the end of 10 years after the resources were given is not a great idea, right? So yeah, definitely makes sense to me that and as Naval Ravikant very famously said that he was a socialist or he was a communist when considering his family, right? That he wants equality for everyone, right? When we reach up a level, right? We have to be more careful, probably more individualistic, and probably more capitalistic when we talk about nations, right? And then we have to employ different levels of uh, uh, you know probably behavior at different stages. So when the larger the group becomes, the more it has to protect from other entities, and then the smaller the group is, the more it has to cohesively adapt and cooperate. So it definitely makes sense to me. And again, I mean, going back to you've talked about a lot of things here, and seems to me that the way we evaluate our of say the people who are going to be a part of the administration, coming back to uh, what you would do eventually, right? Do you think that the evaluation we have right now, right, it's a very extensive procedure, everyone knows about it, right? The steps, we have the examinations, the preliminary examinations, the mains examinations, and do you think the evaluation criteria for young folks who are going to get inducted eventually, it is valid, and the traits of a successful officer, right, are they being tested here, or do you think there is something different, there is something more which could be done, yeah, right, which can probably even enhance uh, our ways of evaluation? What do you think about that?
The current pattern of the civil services examination conducted by the Union Public Service Commission. So this pattern is something which tests the candidate comprehensively. So you have almost everything on the sun being asked to that particular candidate through the three stages, in some or the other form, either written or oral or through the objective MCQ pattern. So you have all the comprehensive aspects of governance, of society, of Indian culture, of history, of geography, of science and technology, of economics. You have all the comprehensive humanities aspects, which might be which are included by testing this candidate. So you basically, when the candidate comes out of this stage of preparation, he is prepared to be a generalist. So he knows something about every single matter going on in India. But we at some point of time in our development trajectory, I think India needs to appreciate that we need specialists as well. So in certain spheres, do need specialists. Steps have been taken in this direction by the current government to bring in lateral entry into the IAS. So after maybe about 15 years in the corporate job, there are quite a number of people who have come in as civil servants and who are actively serving the country even now since the past 2 or 3 years when the scheme was introduced. But at the same time, I do feel that what needs to be improved, or perhaps what can be added, is that we need to have separate examinations for separate cadres or separate services. So to talk about foreign service, USA recruits almost to 20,000 foreign service aspirants, or let's say people, or let's say candidates for their foreign service roles all across the world. China does many times more than what India does. So India, on an average, recruits about 35 to 40 candidates from the UPSC examination for foreign services every year. So as compared to the leaders of the world, as compared to regional leaders, as compared to global leaders, we are nowhere when it comes to recruiting adequate number of people, creating adequate capacity building, creating adequate manpower training for these people. So with that in mind, I do think that we need to have specialized examinations, specialized people to interview, specialized training models for all the different services. So, for example, the rigors which an IPS officer or an IS officer undergoes in his job are very different compared to what the IFS officer or perhaps an Indian Postal Service officer might have to undertake. So, with that in mind, I don't deny that the government gives an adequate opportunity to training for these cadre specific or service specific candidates every year after their recruitment. But I also feel that rather than in certain areas, not in all, in certain areas, there is a need for the government to have a specialist approach to certain professions or say certain services. In almost all professions, like let's say I'm a CA, so for chartered accountancy, company secretaries, for doctors, for lawyers, we have specialized recruitment and regulatory institutions for all of these bodies who are autonomous in nature and who bring out the best standards for training, recruitment, and for induction into these specific careers. So I think we need to see each of these services, let's say the IAS, the IPS, or the IAS, as a IFS, as a specific, as a separate profession. So if we look at it from a professional point of view, I think it will bring in the required expertise, the required capability for training manpower, and the required, let's say, the required rigor which is expected of these professionals to conduct themselves in a manner befitting India's position as a rising world power. There have been attempts by the government, by this current government, to do a lot regarding civil services capability building, like Mission Karma Yogi. But again, while they are more of a comprehensive effort with civil services reforms, what I feel should be done or is the need of the hour is to create specialized professions for each of these services where candidates or let's say students are particularly trained to get a career and get an expertise in foreign services, in administrative services, in postal services, in account services, in defense services, and whatnot.
Wonderful point made there. Right. Many people don't think about this as often, but I think having specialists in the, in the decision making process, definitely consultants must be there all the time, right? Thus, our government must definitely take help of, professional consultants or so. But pe- uh, again, but the problem there is that the consultants would provide the service from a point of view of a consultant, right? The ownership of that responsibility would only come if they were to work particularly for the government for an extended period of time, not as a 3 or 4 month project for a small area, for a small district. So yeah, that whole ownership concept is very really important there, right? And then have there been like how does this actually work? Like, do they recruit people through particular examinations apart from the normal intake method, or how does this work, if you're aware of this?
So yeah, so the lateral entry system is basically based on experience.
Mhm.
So the government takes applications every year from people across sectors, across professions, across various fields of work, and analyzes it, then conducts interviews, and then recruits people directly as joint secretaries into the government. So it takes about, if I'm a fresh recruit passing the Union Public Service examination and getting into the civil services, I will be joining as an undersecretary after my training period, which is quite a lot. So, but for these people who are recruited as lateral entry, who are recruited on the basis of the lateral entry system, they join directly as joint secretaries, which means that as a reward of their experience or their capabilities regarding subject-specific matters, they have a certain, when they join the service, they have a certain level of authority and responsibility that comes with it. So the lateral entry system is a important, is a very, let's say, a revolutionary method to bring in expertise into the civil services. But at the same time, the amount of the quantity of people who are recruited into the by the lateral entry system is far too less as it should be, because till today the only way known to a vast majority of Indians is through the examination, through the civil services examination. But I think there needs to be awareness among people, among executives in corporate roles, that there is a chance for them to serve this country. Just like the Indian Army came out with a tour of duty concept, let's say last year, to introduce people to the thrill of working directly in the armed forces for a short period of time, nonetheless, but still working directly for the armed forces, serving the nation directly. I think there needs to be equal awareness of serving the nation through the bureaucracy too, and that can be done. That can be done by mass promotion of these lateral entry schemes in the corporate world, because if you were to go into a corporate and just speak about it, there'll be 10 people, there will be hundreds of people who might be interested in it. So there is a lot of interest, there is a lot of enthusiasm for this, there is a lot of untapped potential among the people who are working in corporate world that needs to be tapped through mass awareness and mass promotion. Just like, see, I feel that personally, working as a bureaucrat is nothing less than working as a soldier. You are practically a full-time soldier without uniform. That spirit of nation building, or that spirit of creating national integration, that can be done equally by a soldier and also equally by a bureaucrat. So I think that is very important when we talk about awareness of these lateral entry schemes, more tapping the enthusiasm of people who want to really associate themselves with the functioning of the country. I think all these things can be done.
Yes, I am really surprised that I was not aware of this. So I was not aware that people people can actually apply to be a part of, say, the armed forces for some duration, probably not to the full extent, but just to get a feel of how it feels like, how it how the what are the exact conditions, or really what training might have to be under, they might have to undergo before even considering joining that, right? Or even, say, same goes for the bureaucracy as well. Really fascinating. And then I would not have perhaps known this if I did not talk to you, right? So this outreach somehow is very essential, I feel, that people like yourself and even other people, uh, if they try to, but I'm not sure, like, it's not a moral duty to interact with people, but yeah, whenever the chance appears, or wherever there's an opportunity to probably influence the youth, it's really essential that people at least know about it. To do or not to do is their choice, but yeah, the information should be out there. So yeah, and I'm not fascinated. I knew that you have this whole range of knowledge, from from administration to international affairs to how things should go about, right? What could be done, what has to be added, but say, and then you have been on this very long journey, right? And then hopefully we will be seeing you soon in a administrative post, doing something very good for a certain area. But even before that, right, what is your message to probably people who are hearing us, who are watching us, right, to the youth or any other person who might want to tread a similar path? You've spoken about this already, but still, so as a sort of concluding statement to this discussion, what do you have to put out there?
I would just like to make a sincere appeal to all of those who are watching this show that um, India is a land of opportunities. India is a land of potential. More than anything else, it is our country. It is our responsibility to ensure that all of us do contribute in whatever way we can for its development and growth. Um, while the brain drain of current Indian educated professionals, educated students to Western countries is a cause of concern, I think that even though you are getting yourselves educated in a Western country, or perhaps going there for higher education, even perhaps going there for making a good life, uh, it is important to know that it is important for you to understand and appreciate that you have a country back there which is yours, which gave you everything, which gave you education, which gave you all the resources you needed. It is important for all of us as Indians, perhaps as resident Indians, perhaps as non-resident Indians, perhaps even as foreign citizens who trace their roots back to India. It is important for all of us to appreciate that India is our land. India is not just a territory. It is our culture. It is our land. It is our. It is our. It is the. It is the land where all our forefathers, right from time immemorial, have lived. So we cannot abdicate our responsibility to India just because we are not physically. Perhaps we are not physically present in India. We need to do. We need to do whatever we can to ensure that India rises up in the future. There are a lot of initiatives taken by the current government for tapping in scientists, for tapping in research professionals from Western countries and connecting them to Indian research professionals. All of you who are perhaps the leaders of science and technology in the Western world, can contribute to such initiatives. Many such initiatives will be launched in the future. We have a fantastic diaspora, the highest in the world, about 17.5 million people. Just imagine what could happen to India, what could happen to India's growth and development as a nation if 17.5 million Indian diaspora were to contribute in whatever small way they can for the growth of India. So I think as Indians, as people living in India, as well as non-resident Indians, all of us should appreciate that it is it is, see, there are a lot of problems with India. You can come up with a lot of criticisms, lot of complaints, lot of problems, right from potholes to non-availability of beds in hospitals. There are everything. There is a vast range of inequality. There is a vast range of lack of access to resources among the people, among Indians. I completely appreciate and understand the need to make a better life for yourselves in the Western world, or perhaps in a more better country than India. The quality of life is definitely high. But at the same time, I just wish to put forward this message that don't forget that you are a citizen of India, and even though you might carry a foreign passport, the blood in your veins is Indian, nothing else.
Amazing message, Amaya. I think people would really resonate to this. And me personally, even I had this, attitude of not being not so appreciative of what we've been provided until now. The brain drain concept is still there. So really, thank you for putting that message across. I think this this resonates with a lot of people. It will definitely. And yes, thank you for even presenting your views in such a beautiful lucid manner, so that people get to know about different areas, probably which they are not aware of, right? Different opportunities, different ways to serve this country, right? Not even being in the bureaucracy, there could be different ways as well. So yeah, and then wish you all the best for your journey ahead. uh,
Thank you so much.
hopefully we will connect soon, and then you come again here, right? And we get to hear from you soon, right? So yes.
I will definitely enjoy coming here again. Thank you very much for having me on this show.